The Wolves 2023 season kicked off tonight in Toronto. I got Jack Borman to help me break down everything you need to know, and it's coming up next on the Locked On Wolves POSTCAST.
You are Locked On Wolves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Minnesota on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Wolves dropped game one to the Raptors by a score of 97-94. What's up? What's up? Back in the lab, back at it with our first T-Wolves postcast episode right here on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Network. You got myself, Luke Inman, at Luke_Spinman. That's the man over there, Jack Borman, co-host of the Minnesota Basketball Party each and every week up on the Locked On Sports Minnesota channel. Go follow him on X at JRBorman13. And Jack, before we jump into all the action from game one, let me just remind everyone, like, subscribe, the Locked On Sports Minnesota channel. If you haven't already, stay up to date. All the latest news around the Minnesota State, including Vikings coverage, along with Wild and Gophers coverage as well. Let's just jump right into it, man. Wolves taking on the Raptors in Toronto, a place, they said this on the broadcast, I couldn't believe it, a place they've dropped 19 in a row. They haven't won in Toronto in 19 years. First quarter, they started out a little slow out the gate. They missed their first three defensive rebounds in the first 60 seconds. I couldn't help but roll my eyes just a little bit after what we watched last year. Remember the Wolves 26 in offensive and defensive rebounds in 2022, something they've just kind of emphasized all offseason. But then Ant puts the team on his back early on. They go on a 10-2 run. Ant scores all 10 of them for the Wolves. They got it up to a 15-3 run, but then the Raptors just clawed back. It seemed like all night, Wolves shot 32% from the field in the first half. They went down into halftime, down 4. Let's just start there. What did you write down in your notes from that first half, first off, and what'd you like, what'd you didn't?
Yeah, what I liked in the first half was Ant and Karl Anthony Towns. That pairing offensively was pretty fruitful for the Timberwolves, in that the two of them combined for 30 points. They both looked like they were in a really solid offensive rhythm, and combined for 15 rebounds. Anthony Edwards, I believe, had 9 of his 14 rebounds in the first half, which was, one of the better rebounding halves, if not the best rebounding half he's ever had. And the team as a whole rebounded really well on the offensive end of the floor. They collected an offensive rebound on 43.5% of their missed shots, which ranks in the 96th percentile if you kind of extrapolate that stat out as a team stat. And their half-court defense was really, really solid as well. They had a very clear plan of trying to force Toronto to take jump shots, and they did that very well. The problem was just what you alluded to, was that they really struggled to corral defensive rebounds at a consistent rate. They allowed 7 offensive rebounds and 14 second chance points in the first half. And you saw that tone was set right away on the first couple of possessions there, when, Toronto misses two jumpers, gets 2 offensive rebounds, and ends with a 3. And all of us are just kind of throwing our hands up saying, here we go again. And then the other things that weren't great for the Wolves in that first half, that they shot 3 of 15 from 3 in the first half. So and that continued throughout the game. I believe they shot 5 of 16 in the second half. So that didn't really, it didn't really change. And then their transition defense obviously was the biggest down spot there. They allowed Toronto to create a transition opportunity. I believe the number was 41% of Toronto's defensive rebounds turned into transition opportunities, which is just abysmal. And it certainly felt that way early on. And then, you see, I believe Toronto ended up finishing with something ridiculous like 34 fast break points, which I'm certain was a number that they did not allow in a game last season. It's a lot of the things that they struggled with last season, they struggled again today, with the exception of 3-point shooting. So it's I guess frustrating for fans in that, you play a team that just is kind of composed in a weird manner. A lot of just big playmaking wings that struggle to shoot the ball and just kind of junk the game up and create kind of a gross game to watch at times. And that's certainly what you saw in that first half.
Yeah, well said there. And second half was kind of more of the same. You touched on a little bit of it, but again, Wolves They look sloppy, to say the least. A lot of turnovers in really tough, inopportune times, situations, and huge moments. They shot 34% from the field by the time it was all said and done. And from behind the arc, you kind of already touched on it again. Specifically, though, I think that was the big difference. Wolves shot 25% from three. Raptors shot 40%. I mean, that right there will do it. You combine that with the Raptors going, plus 30 in fast break points. And it was just a tough hill to climb all night. Yet, I say all that, and as bad as they looked, they were still in this thing until the very end. Kind of your second half thoughts and notes that you kind of jotted down there.
Yeah, and that's the frustrating thing is that I think, a couple of weeks from now, hopefully the Wolves are, something like 6-2 or 7-4 or something.
That'd be
like
nice.
that.
Yeah.
And you kind of look back at this game like, man, what happened there? And that's just the downside, I guess, of going undefeated in the preseason is that you're kind of come back down to earth game happens in the regular season as opposed to the preseason. But in the second half, I mean, it was really a tale of two quarters. They looked fantastic in the third quarter, battling back into this game. They rebounded the ball really, really well in that third quarter. Toronto, again, went back into what they were doing for most of the first quarter, which was settling for all these contested jump shots. And really all five players on the floor for the Timberwolves rebounded the ball really, really well. And they forced some turnovers and they got out and ran in transition and were able to create some easy baskets. Got Naz Reid going.
Yeah,
that was a really important thing for them. He's just a guy, I said this on Twitter is, outside of Anthony Edwards, no one creates more energy for the Timberwolves with their scoring than Naz Reid. It just feels like when they're in a rhythm, Naz Reid is in a rhythm. And I think that's going to be a really important thing for this team moving forward is finding out ways to get him more involved offensively. They did it in the preseason and they just kind of went away from everything that they did in the preseason, at least offensively. But in that third quarter, that last lineup that they had out there, when they had Karl Anthony Towns at the 5, was protecting the rim really, really well. And Shake Milton kind of started to find himself at that backup point guard spot after a tough first half. But the biggest thing that stuck out to me, obviously, in that fourth quarter was just really poor shot selection and decision making with the ball in their hands. I mean, it was kind of funny seeing Karl Anthony Towns throw the ball to Rudy Gobert in a post-up situation when they were down 4 with 30 seconds left. Was just kind of a microcosm of their decision making that whole second half, where they were just rushed. They didn't look comfortable. They had some really, like you said, off the rip, some really inopportune turnovers. But I mean, Anthony Edwards is the leader of this team, and he should be held accountable for his second half performance. I mean, really the last 3 quarters, he was not good at all. He rebounded the ball really, really well. He stayed engaged there. Credit to him there. But he scored 12 points on 3 of 5 shooting in the first quarter and scored 14 on 5 of 22 shooting.
Wow.
Beyond that, and played a lot of just one-on-one sloppy, hero ball that just didn't work. And then you saw him take on the Dennis Schroeder assignment in closing time. And Dennis Schroeder just blew right by him and got to the rim, or got by him and got downhill more than a few times. So, and Karl Anthony Towns too was not good in the fourth quarter. Looked, like I said, rushed with things, just didn't look comfortable. Looked like he really, wanted to make plays that weren't there. And, I think the Wolves just kind of had ants in their pants the whole second half and just kind of have to calm down. And I think getting Jaden McDaniels back, hopefully on Saturday, is kind of a connective tissue that can kind of help bring all this, the other members of the starting 5 together. I think will be a huge help if he's able to go.
Yeah, I want to talk about McDaniels here in a second. But again, obviously frustrating start to the season. After, again, you mentioned it, they look so crisp, so good all preseason. And Coach Finch said it earlier this week, saying sometimes when the lights turn on and things get bright, things don't always look the same. Certainly looked like the case tonight. They just couldn't put it all together. Was there just one, maybe 2 takeaways as far as like what they need to fix first and foremost that's tangible, something you can put on paper? And I guess how fixable were those mistakes tonight?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I'd think of is just, be more methodical offensively. I think that how you see that and what's tangible is, are the Wolves passing the ball more than 3, 4, 5 times in a possession? And you just didn't see a lot of that tonight. I think we saw a lot of that in the preseason where the Timberwolves were running more plays rather than just kind of freelancing out there. And you didn't see a whole lot of plays tonight, which was, I guess, frustrating considering, that was the best part of their preseason, performance as a whole. And then beyond that, defensively, I think their perimeter defense was pretty horrible. I know that they were going under on screens and trying to force Toronto to shoot, but they got way too lazy in doing that, and just kind of half-ass one under screens, and Toronto's ball handlers really exploited that and got to the rim at a really high level. And if they didn't score at the rim, they were throwing wraparound passes to the corner and kind of getting the ball in rotation and getting that ball moving like we've seen the Timberwolves do in the preseason, and we just didn't see that from the Wolves tonight. So I think the two biggest things are just how much are they able to move the ball offensively, and then two, can they keep opposing guards in front of them? And obviously, there's nobody better in the NBA doing that than Jaden McDaniels. So hopefully getting him back will be a huge help. And the other thing too, I guess, is, like I said, Toronto's just a weird matchup. Their first four guys in Schroeder, Barnes, Anunoby, and Siakam are all, guys that spend a lot of time handling the ball. Schroeder's 6'1", but he's lightning fast, and the other three guys are anywhere from 6'7" to 6'9" and can get to the rim. So just a really weird matchup to start the season, and hopefully one that I think a week or 2 weeks from now you'll be able to write off to just that was a weird and tough matchup for the Wolves.
One more last one here on the game, then we'll get to a couple bigger picture stuff. But just something that I noticed that was kind of a struggle for them early on, I wanted to ask you about, is they just weren't finishing through contact. And that's going to be a big question for them all season, is can they embrace being the bully, so to speak? Can they use all that size to their advantage, unlike what we saw from them last year? And I think fans just want to see them be a more physical unit, I guess, really, top to bottom, simple as that. I think that's fair, isn't it, with this lineup?
It certainly is. I mean, I don't want to say that hope is misplaced a little bit, but I think people have to be honest about Rudy Gobert a little bit, and that, Rudy Gobert is 7'1". He's huge. He's got, a 7'9", 7'10" wingspan. But he doesn't really impose himself physically on the offensive end. And he's much more of a play above the rim guy and screen setter out in the perimeter, rather than a guy that just, catches the ball like a Joel Embiid would, where he can catch the ball on the block and just go right through people and score. And then with Karl Anthony Towns at times, when Rudy Gobert is out on the floor, you see him playing more out on the perimeter. So it's something that I think the Timberwolves are going to have to continue to learn. And honestly, the guy who does that the best is Naz Reid. So I think, the more that we kind of see Naz Reid get involved offensively, especially, it doesn't matter who he's playing alongside, whether it's Cat or Gobert. I think the more involved you see Naz get offensively, I think the more kind of that'll empower everyone around him to play more physically and play with force, especially around the rim.
Just real quick, what'd you see early on here tonight from the Ant-Rudy kind of combo connection? Because all offseason, the preseason, we've watched them grow. We've watched them play well off of each other nicely a few times tonight off the pick and roll. That alley-oop in Chicago, the last preseason game, was phenomenal. How'd they look tonight specifically, just those two?
Yeah, I think that, I think people take Rudy Gobert for granted, and that Rudy Gobert is one of the best screen setters that's ever played this game.
Yeah.
And that's something that, 2 years ago, Karl Anthony Towns wasn't all that great at. He was much better down the stretch of the season, and once he understood Ant's timing and that sort of thing. But Gobert created so much space for Anthony Edwards early on. I think, all of Ant's first 3 buckets that he scored in that first quarter that got him into a rhythm all came off of Rudy Gobert screens, whether they were on-ball screens or off-ball screens to free him up to come catch a pass. So in that department, they were certainly good. And then Ant had that great find on a pick and roll that resulted in the Rudy Gobert and one, early in that first quarter. But outside of that, you didn't really see a whole lot of Ant looking for Rudy. I think Ant kind of had tunnel vision, and really just kind of wanted to score in isolation. I mean, it's hard when you have such a powerful, dynamic scorer. Kind of gets it going early, feels good, and then obviously you kind of want to ride that wave. And unfortunately for Ant, that wave kind of crashed early, and he kept trying to go find another one, and it wasn't there. But definitely still a work in progress. I think that for more people to respect Anthony Edwards and allow him more one-on-one matchups after screens, I think he's going to have to start to find Rudy Gobert more. Otherwise, they're just going to trap him. And we saw some of that in the third quarter. And unfortunately for the Timberwolves, their ball movement after Ant got trapped just wasn't where it needed to be. And that's something that they're going to have to figure out, because they certainly figured it out last season when Karl-Anthony Towns wasn't out there. And I'm not saying that this is on Karl-Anthony Towns at all. I'm just saying that, like, Jaden McDaniels is a guy who's great at catching the ball and attacking closeouts and making another pass. It's just kind of those kind of connective plays that you see that the Wolves just didn't have tonight. And, it's not something that I'm overly concerned about. We saw some flashes in the preseason. I think the biggest thing is just kind of resisting the urge to overreact to this game, because, the Raptors just kind of clog up the floor on both ends of the floor and make it a mucky and gross game. So all the credit in the world to the Raptors for executing that game plan. But I think that, when you're seeing, a more spread out game, if you will, that's when you kind of see that Ant and Gobert connection thrive a little bit more.
You mentioned McDaniels. He was out tonight with that strained calf. He's listed as day-to-day. Impossible to say, I know, but was that a game you feel a lot better about, just knowing how it played out if he's out on the court tonight?
Yeah, I think it's hard to, just say that he would fix a lot of the ball movement issues that they have in offense.
Yeah.
I certainly think that he would help in that department. I think the biggest area he would have changed that game is on the ball defensively. I think if you would have put Jaden McDaniels on Dennis Schroeder, who's 6'1", and just kind of said, you know what, we should probably have Jaden guard one of the 6'7", 6'8" wings, but instead we're going to have him guard a 6'1" Dennis Schroeder just to completely shut down that source of offense. And I mean, Schroeder scored 22 points and had 7 assists, both of which led the Raptors tonight. So I think it's fair to say that Schroeder's game would have been a lot different if Jaden had been there. But I think Jaden McDaniels certainly is the difference between a win and a loss in this game. But I think even without Jaden McDaniels, this is one that I think in a week or two the Wolves will be kicking themselves about and thinking is a bad loss, but hopefully a necessary one, in that they put a lot of bad things on film and correctable mistakes, and hopefully that'll, I guess, serve them well moving forward here.
Yeah, hopefully this flips a switch and maybe just kind of wakes them up a little bit moving forward with this tough stretch. I do want to ask you about the bigger picture with this Wolves team coming up next, right after I tell you about PrizePicks. Today's postcast is brought to us by our friends over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is without a doubt the most fun I've had playing daily fantasy, because you can win up to 25 times your money this football season. Why I love it is because it's so easy to play. All you got to do is select 2 or more players and pick more or less than their projected stats on any given night. This week, I had Jordan Addison over 5.5 catches and TJ Hawkinson over 52 yards. Easy money on that Monday Night Thriller versus San Francisco. That's just one example, though. And now you can even cross sports and pick multiple players in different sports altogether. So if you like Kirk Cousins this week versus Green Bay and USC's Caleb Williams versus Cal, you can get both those guys in your lineup thanks to PrizePicks. That's just another reason why PrizePicks is the funnest way to play daily fantasy. Plus, PrizePicks now offers Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account all season long. And with the PrizePicks reboot policy, your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. I'd love that. So in any NFL game or college football matchup, if your player gets hurt in the first half and doesn't return, that player gets rebooted on your bet slip. That makes PrizePicks the only daily fantasy platform around that offers you injury insurance to give you that extra peace of mind. Right now, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code LockedOnNBA at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA for 100% bonus deposit match up to $100. One more time, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA.
I use that Apple Pay. I use that.
How great is that Apple Pay?
I used it today or yesterday. Actually, got that $50 bonus in before.
That's what I'm saying, man. PrizePicks,
so.
Chef's Kits. It's the
Gotta
best.
love it.
All right. We talked about game 1. Let's talk about the big picture, though, and what this front office has done. I know you guys have talked about it on the Minnesota basketball party a little bit, maybe Locked On Wolves, Ben Beacon, but they were busy to say the least. Let me just ask you about the new faces first and foremost. And Shake Milton's the guy I'm most intrigued about. 5 years in Philly, kind of in his prime. Chris Finch is expecting him to this year, so to speak. He's looked really comfortable and really good in that Wolves jersey thus far. But Troy Brown Jr., that was another face already brought in. It just feels like they solidified not only the depth, but they've got some real veteran experience now that they didn't have before when it comes to some of these nice depth pieces.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a huge win for the Wolves. I mean, Shake Milton did not play his best game tonight,
No.
which was unfortunate. I mean, he made a huge three that helped the Wolves retake that lead in the third quarter. But I think for someone like him, it's just going to take a little bit of time. I think, he's needed to be a lot more of a scorer in Philadelphia, especially on nights when they didn't have James Harden or Tyrese Maxey. And you go look at his game logs the end of last season, he was scoring really, really well. And I think for someone like him that's just been so used to a completely different system in Philadelphia, it's just going to take a little bit of time, especially for a guy who, at least in the preseason, showed that he's just got a really nice feel for when to play make or when to score. And I think, like you said, when the lights come on and it's go time for real, I think figuring some of those things out just takes a little bit of time. But in terms of the veteran leadership aspect, I mean, those are two guys that have been in the league now for 6, 7, 8 years and are really comfortable playing around, high usage guys, as we've seen. Troy Brown was really, really good playing around LeBron James and Anthony Davis last season in Los Angeles. And then Shake Milton with obviously with Embiid and then Ben Simmons when Simmons was there, and then James Harden too. So with role guys, it'll take them a little bit of time to settle in just because the offense isn't playing through them as much. But I think you saw with Shake, he just had some good moments of, all right, let's just kind of get organized here and pull it out when the offense got a little hectic there. I think you'd like Shake to be a little bit better defensively, especially on the ball. Dennis Schroeder burned him quite a few times. But, I think, again, it's just trusting what you saw in the preseason as a bigger sample size. And I was really surprised that Troy Brown Jr. didn't get more run, especially considering that, I think he was 10 of 20 from three in the preseason, and this team really needed some juice from deep, and he only played 5 minutes. I don't think he played in the second half after getting some run in the first half there. So that's something that I'm really going to be trying to keep an eye on here, especially if the Wolves continue to struggle a little bit with their spacing and not being able to knock down enough shots.
Yeah, and outside of the names they brought in, I think more importantly was all the big names that they obviously retained along the way too. Not only get Ant signed and inked up, but then you get Jade McDaniels, Nod Reed, some others too. Just talk to me about the offseason the Wolves had as a whole and how excited, I guess, Wolves fans should be for this year and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I last week on the Minnesota basketball party, we were giving out grades for Tim Connolly, and I said I gave him an A- and it'd go up to an A if they were able to extend Jaden McDaniels. And
yeah,
when we saw that final number, I mean, to be completely honest, I was expecting if they were able to pull off a contract extension that it would be closer to 5 years, 150 million or 160 million.
Yeah,
and they got him at 131 in guaranteed money.
Feels good.
Feels like a win to me.
So let me ask you this then, just stemming off that, because I'm a big NFL guy, covered the NFL for over a decade, and the salary cap is always such a big piece of the puzzle for every team, every offseason. When I see all these big names signed and all the money that went along with it, obviously you love it on paper, but I guess the worry for me is just how much they're kicking the proverbial can down the road. So what does it all look like now the next few years? Is this a deep playoff / championship type of window they've now built that could potentially shrink sooner than later over the next few years if they're not careful?
Not to give you a coach speak answer, but it really depends on how they play on the floor.
Okay.
And that, I think that this ownership group's appetite to, pay that or pick up and deal with that can instead of kicking it down the road will really depend on what this team's record looks like around Christmas. And that, really the only thing that is going to, be a factor this season and next season for the Timberwolves is whether their ownership group wants to pay a luxury tax bill. And right now, I mean, if they were to let Mike Conley walk, let Kyle Anderson walk after this season, let Jordan McLaughlin walk after this season, and bring back Milton and Brown Jr. And, they'd have $4 million to work with under this second apron, which is $17.5 million over the luxury tax. And the importance of this second apron is that when you go over the second apron, you're not really going to get taxed all that much more, on a per dollar basis than you are if you're below it. There's team building implications where there's certain exceptions that you aren't able to use. It's harder to make trades. And then if you're over that second apron, I believe it's for, I think 3 or 4 years in a row, then, how the NBA works with their first round picks is, I believe, 7 years ahead is the last first round pick that you're able to trade. And if you're over that second apron for, I think 3 or 4 years in a row, that pick becomes frozen, and you have to then be under the second apron for, I think, 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row, for that pick to become then unfrozen and allow you to move it. So really for the Wolves, it's just going to be, if they end up being over that second apron in 24-25, you're looking at a tax bill of at least $35 million, but likely, closer to 40 or 45 if they do want to bring back Mike Conley and or Kyle Anderson. But if they stay under it, again, you're still looking at like a $30 to $35 million tax bill. And that's no small thing. I mean, it's been reported by multiple people that the Timberwolves ownership group hasn't, exactly had the easiest time coming up with the funds for everything. Whether that's true or not, we'll see. I mean, the dates for them, coming through with those payments has been delayed a couple of different times. But again, I think it's much easier to justify that 25 to 35, $40 million, whatever it ends up being, if this team is in, really good position come January or February, and you're already in the, you're not in the will they avoid the play-in conversation, they're in the will they host a first round playoff series conversation, which I think is a place that this team expects to be in, given, how much star power there is up top. But then, like you were saying, with bringing in guys like Milton and Brown Jr., and that they're, really, experienced, smart, capable players that, not only raise the ceiling, but I think really raise the floor of this team. That's kind of going to be the elephant in the room that will get bigger and bigger and bigger as the Timberwolves lose more games. Because again, if you're not going to be that host a first round playoff series team that everyone thinks that the Timberwolves can be, you just can't justify paying all this money for it.
Well said. Phenomenal breakdown. Can't wait to pick your brain a little bit more as we go on throughout the season about this salary cap and the roster top to bottom. Before we wrap up, it's week 1. Obviously, it's game 1. It's a long season. Did you give a Wolves total win prediction on the basketball party this year? And do you wish you could change it already, or are you still pretty confident?
I did. So this morning, I said the Timberwolves, my estimation was that the Timberwolves would be 52-30 and be the second seed in the West.
Spicy. Okay. I like that.
And I don't want to change it right now. I mean, I think, again, like, this Timberwolves team just has some finicky combinations that we've seen out there. I mean, Kyle Anderson has been a 4 or a 5 even pretty much his entire career, and he's being asked to be a 3 right now. It was as bad of a game as Anthony Edwards is probably going to play, and he still had 26 and 14. And Karl Anthony Towns was 2 of 10 from 3. He's been a 42%, 42% 3-point shooter pretty much his entire career. That'll come around. Same thing with Mike Conley, shooting 1 of 4 from 3. It's just a game where I think you acknowledge that it wasn't your best game. There's certainly some things you can fix that you've already shown the ability to do so far this season in the preseason. And the hope is that you can find a rhythm here, and they've got the talent where if they find a rhythm, it would not surprise me at all if this team went on a 7, 8, 9, 10 game win streak at some point this season. So I think the most important thing is to just not overreact and trust in the roster that they've built here, and the fact that Karl Anthony Towns is healthy, and they didn't have that luxury last season, and that's something that I think you're not really thinking about in the short term with a game like that, but it's something that will certainly pay dividends in the long run.
Yeah, well said. Last one here. I know the Wolves schedule on paper out the gate is an absolute gauntlet, at least these first 5-10 games anyways, before it kind of softens back up a little bit. What do they got to do during this tough stretch to kind of plant their flag, so to speak, and solidify themselves as the team we all expect them to be? And is there one matchup out of all these tough games coming up that you're kind of looking forward to the most that maybe you've had circled since the schedule came out?
Yeah, I think the game against Miami certainly is one,
Yeah.
just because the last time Jimmy Butler and the Heat played at Target Center, you had that awesome game on Drunksgiving. And
Right.
dunked on Gabe Vincent. You had the Rachel Nichols chance going.
Love it.
So I think that one obviously stands out. Not to mention it's the home opener, which I think is fun. But I think getting 3 out of 4 games, you get Nikola Jokic, Jason Tatum, and Zion Williamson that's obviously a gauntlet in 3 of your first 5 home games. So I'm really excited to see how the Timberwolves match up with those type of star players, and all 3 of those guys really impact the game in really different ways. And that's where the versatility and the optionality that this Timberwolves defense has available to them will be really interesting. So defensive coordinator Elston Turner will I'm sure test a few different things here to see what works and what doesn't against some of the best players in the NBA. I think if the Timberwolves start this season, I think if they can start this season 3-3 or 4-2, that's obviously a great thing. And then really you're just kind of living until you get to Thanksgiving. And then once you get to Thanksgiving, things really kind of start to soften up a little bit. So I think if they're a 500 team or better by Thanksgiving, I think that they'll be kind of off and running, and and be able to kind of rattle off some wins, get in a rhythm, and get going.
Yeah, well said. Wolves start the season kind of on a sour note here, run into a buzzsaw today, loss in Toronto, a place they have still yet to win now in 19 years. Still can't believe that. Huge shout to everybody that joined us on tonight's postcast. Have no fear. Jack kind of gave us a little bit glass half full here. I think we're going to be okay. It's only 1 game out of 82, 81 left. Rest assured, we're going to be here each and every T-Wolves game to break it all down. Quick reminder as well, go check out Jack each and every week on the Minnesota Basketball Party. Sam Ekstrom's hosting, Ben Beacon, Locked On Wolves, Ron Johnson, and Care 11's very own Reggie Wilson. They're pumping out everything you need to know all season long about your Minnesota Timberwolves right here on the Locked On Sports Minnesota channel. That'll do it for us tonight, though, in Game 1. Wolves lose to the Raptors. Miami on deck next at home in the backyard at the Target Center this Saturday night. Tip-off, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Follow us on X at Luke_Spinman and at JR Borman 13, and follow all our work over on the Locked On Sports Minnesota Network, and of course, the Locked On Wolves postcast. He's Jack Borman. I'm Luke Inman. Until next time, signing out.